all the honorable members of the select committee and welcome the minister, the deputy minister, the senior officials of the Department of Public Enterprises, as well as the Transnet board and Transnet executive. Honorable members, today, as you know, that we will be getting a presentation on Transnet and how Transnet is doing.
Recording in progress.
And I wish to express my appreciation to the department for agreeing on this date, because Wednesday is always a little bit problematic. Now, without further ado, let me declare this meeting duly opened and go straight to the credentials. I want to ask the Secretariat if we do have any apologies. Amanda, can you indicate if we have any apologies?
Honorable Brains apology. Thank you.
We only received one apology. We couldn't hear you properly there, Amanda.
Sorry, Chair. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I have only Honorable Brains apology. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, noted. Okay, members, then I think let's go straight to the first item on the agenda and welcome the minister and the entire delegation and afford an opportunity to the minister to proceed by making his opening remarks and set the scene for the presentation, which we're going to get on Transnet. Honorable Minister Pravin Gordhan, I welcome you to this meeting and thank you for coming, and give you now the opportunity to take the podium and address the committee.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning to you. Good morning to the honorable members, to the Deputy Minister, members of the Transnet board, and colleagues from Public Enterprises and the Transnet management. I'll be very brief, Chair, because I'll participate later once we have the presentation made. Safe to say that Transnet is making steady progress in improving both its operations on the one hand, but also investing in the future on the other hand, in terms of infrastructure, equipment, and personnel as well. Secondly, that whilst there are still gaps in terms of operational expectations from various sectors, let me say that there are very clear plans which we presented during our budget vote, which the Transnet management will repeat now, in terms of, let's call them in-year improvements, and then, of course, medium-term improvements in respect of each of the components of Transnet itself. There's no doubt that what we require is a multiplicity of initiatives. Firstly, in terms of the number of, for example, cranes available at our ports. Secondly, in terms of tugs and other essential vessels that are required for the waterside operations of the Ports Authority, which you'll hear about. And thirdly, on the rail side, whether it's the condition of the railway lines, the repeated problems of copper theft and other forms of theft and destruction of infrastructure, which we are still not able to get on top of as a state, not just as Transnet. And of course, the continuous battles that we are still having in settling the matters with the Chinese suppliers of locomotives. notwithstanding our visit to China. But we remain optimistic in that particular regard as chair, with regard to that matter. So I'm not sure who's here from the board side. If the chair is here, and he wants to make some remarks, is welcome to do so. Otherwise, Chair, I hand over to Ms. Portia Darby to introduce her team and
Chair.
make the presentation.
Good morning, Chair. Can you hear me, Minister?
Yes, Alwani.
Yeah, it's Alwani Ramabrana, board member Transnet, and also the chair of audit. Sorry, I'm on my mobile phone, if you can't hear me properly. I just want to make a few remarks as per the minister's invite. I think as board, and I think when Portia comes in, she will also confirm that beyond the efforts of trying to get the spare parts and sort out the issue of the locomotives from the Chinese, we are also making various...
Sorry, Chairperson, Mr. Alwani.
What confusion is this now?
Mr. Alwani.
Yes, I can hear you, Chair. Yeah.
Is it possible that you can switch on your camera so that as you address us, this is a live transmission as well for the benefit of the nation, unless you are in a position which has got a weak signal, then we can.
Yeah, I am in an area with a weak signal, and also I'm on mobile phone, so I won't even be visible anyhow.
All right, okay, then
so
carry on.
If you don't mind, just a few remarks, yeah. So we are making great efforts besides the local issues. There are a few areas where we are trying to bring efficiencies. For an example, we working very closely with the mining industry, which you would know is our biggest client in terms of volumes and revenue, single biggest client sector. We're collaborating with them in terms of helping us in areas where they have a much further and deeper reach than we do, and to ensure that we can also expedite, some of the procurement areas that are related to operations, especially on emergency situations when we have derailments to recover quicker. So we are funding some of those efforts in the collaboration with the mining industry. For instance, in the manganese corridor, we have seen some improvements with that kind of collaboration, and also we are seeing increasing improvements on the security side with the collaboration with the industry. So we are deepening and expediting those efforts. That's just one of the examples of what we're doing over and above the issues of the locals, because we believe that we're not just going to wait for the locals. We will continue to bring efficiencies. For instance, some of the things we are undertaking technical assessments on the various corridors to ensure that we can identify all the fault areas where we can fix issues that are within our control. I think that is really the main message that I'd like to convey, that we're trying to ensure that we do all we can within our control operationally to ensure that we increase the volumes, we increase the efficiencies, and we bring back the revenue, and therefore strengthen the balance sheet. And of course, you will know, Chairman, our efforts with the private sector participation, which is government policy. That is the area we are also driving very strongly, and I think Portia can also explain that in more detail. So I think from where we're sitting as a board, and also with what the AG requires us to do, because going forward the AG is going to be auditing us on operational performance. So as board, we are driving that much harder, and ensuring that we stay close to the issues of operational performance improvement, so that we can start seeing some changes, in spite of the challenges that we're having with the locals. And you will understand that we also have a very strong organization as in Transnet Engineering, which has the biggest, workshop in Africa, rolling stock workshop in Africa. And they've got workshops all over the country. So with that, we're trying to see how we can, together with the OEMs, of course, in partnership with the OEMs, we're trying to see how we can, strengthen, Transnet Engineering to help us, bring back some of those long-standing locos and also help us with the maintenance issues. So those are some of the efforts that we're making. We've got a facility with the IDC that we're going to tap on to bring back some of the long-standing locals much faster. So I think just to highlight a few of the efforts, but Portia can elaborate a lot more on that. These are some of the efforts that we're looking into as board, to try to drive operational performance going forward. And of course, once the issues of the Chinese locals is sorted, that will just be hopefully, help us to even expedite operational performance in the coming years. So I hope with that gives you a bit of an idea of, from a board perspective, what are some of the things that we're driving to ensure that we bring back performance and we bring back, volumes on the rail. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson of the board. I think now let me invite the Group Chief Executive Officer of Transnet to introduce her team and then take us through the contents of the presentation. We have indeed received the presentation in advance, but of course, I'm sure you will talk to it rather than reading it word for word. Ms. Portia, I invite you to assume the podium.
Good morning, Honourable Chair and Honourable Members. Good morning, Minister and Deputy Minister and Mr. Alawani. I'm Ramabulan as well. Apologies, Honourable Chair, for the absence of our board chairperson, Dr. Molefe. Chair, I'm not sure who's going to be flighting the presentation. So as that comes up, we decided that we've stuck to the question as asked, Honourable Chair, which says measures to improve operations on rail and at the ports, and have requested the two CEOs of TMPA and TPT, and Nkosi Mabaso is going to present for the CEO of TFR as a result of an unfortunate bereavement in her family. So Bepi Silinga will talk to TMPA and Jabu Dagi will make the presentation on behalf of TPT. As the Minister, as the slides are being sorted out, as the Minister started off and Alu indicated, that we continue to have some serious, I suppose in the last 2 weeks or so, we've been facing quite a barrage of cable theft. It's often there, and we monitor it on an ongoing basis. But in the since the 25th of May to the 1st of June, we've had 13.4 kilometers of cable stolen, copper cable stolen. Now, unusually, we actually had close on a kilometer stolen on the Sishin Saldana line. And that normally doesn't happen because it's isolated and it's generally stayed safe. And as per unfortunate usual, on the container corridor, which is the lines from Gauteng through to KZN, we lost about 5.5 kilometers in a week. So it just gives you a sense of how huge this problem was. And I think, as indicated before to Parliament, the rail system is not like the national road where there are two lines. More often than not, it's a single line. And what will often happen is that you'll have passing loops. The problem is whenever the rail gets stolen in a section where you are far from a passing loop, the line is then blocked and nothing can happen until you've reconnected the electricity and then are able to move the train away. As was indicated in the working relationship which we've been improving with the mining companies, we were able to return the line on the Sishen-Saldanha line quite fast because we worked quite closely with the customers. There's no doubt in my head that the more we refine and improve and introduce efficiencies to our procurement processes, we as Transnet would be better able to turn around faster with some of these return to service issues whenever we have either derailment or cable theft. We've also, in certain instances in the recent while, had quite a few derailments which have had quite a significant impact on the volumes that we've moved, even in this very financial year. The causes of derailments are simple yet complex sometimes. Simple in the sense of we've underinvested in bringing back to service the rail infrastructure in maintenance, in driving maintenance of the track and of the system. So what that means is that either we have significant speed restrictions. Now, as you know, the most of the mining areas are in our steepest parts of the country. So we need a lot of trains, and you need a lot of locals, and you need a lot of power to move up the hill. Now, when you have a speed restriction and you're pulling a heavy train up the up a hill or up some sort of a steep, you cannot afford to have any of the locals die at that point, because if any of the local, you have a significant loss of traction as you're moving up, that leads nowhere but to derailment. So a few of those we've had, and the fact that there was a speed restriction is a reflection of the underinvestment on the track itself. So all of these issues around dealing with the backlog in a sustainable fashion without causing inflation, by the way, in South Africa, because we're quite a big buyer of would-be steel, cement, and the rest of and also there's a limited number of companies who are able to help us take care of the running maintenance. We have to find the resources. In our case, we have to find the resources directly from Transnet to invest in the track on the one hand, and on the other hand, to ensure that we continue to invest on rail. Now, this story is only a TFR story fundamentally. The rest of the operating divisions are in a much stronger position. And I think over the next coming years, you will see that come up. Pepe Seling is going to focus on port operations. Jabu will, on TNPA in particular. Jabu Mdagu will talk on port operations, and we'll start giving you a sense of some of the things that we're planning to do to improve performance of the port. The rankings of our ports in terms of performance, and that fundamentally is a ranking of the container terminals, is in very tightly interrelated with the amount of port equipment that we have available at every single container terminal. So there's a program that we have in place is to increase the density of equipment whilst ensuring that we keep to an optimal allocation of people at the port, especially given the fact that we have these significant jobs problems in South Africa. And lastly, before Bepi starts to speak, what we have been doing right across the system to ensure that the equipment, because we are two things. We are a heavy people reliant business, but also a very capital intensive business as well. What we haven't done well, and to a large measure, not all of it just because of Transnet, and I'll explain, is the ongoing maintenance of equipment, of all of our equipment, both at the ports, the locomotives. The wagons are a lot better, and why the wagons are a lot better is because we as Transnet Engineering are the OEM. Most of the components we get directly in South Africa, so it's a shorter supply chain. In the case of locomotives, which are from global OEMs, ship-to-shore cranes, rail-mounted gantries or RTGs, straddle carriers, and the rest like those we buy from international OEMs. There's often no consignment stock located in South Africa. We have never been able to enter into really long materials reliability and supply agreements with any of the OEMs, both on rail and both at the ports, because of this particular requirement under the PFMA that you cannot undertake a procurement before you have a budget. Now, ideally, these agreements are always 10, 20-year agreements, And what you would have in a company is that we constantly are generating revenue. So we also need the equipment to be available for us to continue generating revenue. The rules as they currently stand say that you must be able to show the money before you can undertake the procurement, an area that we are getting support to resolve. And so now we are finally in the position where we can enter into these agreements, which means that the problem of long lead items will no longer be an issue that we have to deal with. But Pepe, if you can, please. Guys, I think we've got 45 minutes max for the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair, and good morning, honorable members of Parliament, and good morning, Minister and board members. My name is Pepe Silinga. Chair, I'm going to be running relatively very quickly in our presentation. If we would go to the next slide. TNPA, Honorable Chairperson, is basically an entity that is focused on three core businesses. The marine services, which is constituted by those three elements: the pilotage, the towage, as well as berthing. The related infrastructure to services to that chair would be a dredging, as well as a ship repair, dry dock type of services that were consolidated under that particular portfolio. And then there's the authority and the regulatory function. This is what presiding over the performance of the terminal operators and issuing the requisite licenses to enable those particular operations to perform. And last but not least, a significant portfolio of being a landlord function and a provider of infrastructure. This would in particular be related to wet infrastructure, dry infrastructure, above ground, below ground, common user infrastructure, to ensure that there's equal access by port users to the infrastructure. Next slide, please. And in terms of our performance, Chair, it's a mixed bag. There's two areas that we still need to check up. The first one is under the marine services delays. And these are KPIs, Chair, that would be incorporated in the corporate plan. And in this particular instance, the three ports, which is the Port of Durban, Ngqurha, and Cape Town, these would be in relation to the container terminals that are operated by TPT. But we do terminal oversight over all terminal operators, and there's an odd 98 licenses. But in this instance, we're only reporting on these particular three. You'd see that Durban, there's been a marginal improvement. We're at a target of 3 hours, 14 minutes in terms of marine service delays, and we performed, or rather the performance improved by 3%. It's still a long way from where we have aspirations to be. You would see that on the right-hand side, for the current year, the target is 2 hours to try and force Durban downwards. And for the Port of Ngqurha, we had a target of 3 hours, and we're able to achieve 1 hour, 30 minutes, which is a 57% performance, or we dropped it by more than half to that 1 hour, 30 minutes. And Cape Town, amongst all others, having been a star performer, and we're able to reduce our performance 14 times, or rather increase our performance 14 times and dropped it to just about 20 minutes. And all of these would have been occasioned by specific interventions, work studies undertaken, continuous improvement measures, and specific and targeted measures. That would also include management of the change over times when the shifts are changing, amongst other issues, but also in increasing the reliability and the availability of the marine fleet that enables the service to increase in terms of its speed. If we go to the authority and the regulatory function, the ship turnaround time is effectively the time that it takes once the vessel crosses the quay wall, or rather crosses the breakwater into at the port and then getting out of the port. And this is a function of the efficiency of working on the vessel and the time that it actually takes to tie the ropes once the vessel is pushed to the berth, and the time that it also takes to actually untie those particular ropes, but largely due to the efficiency of operations, how quickly the vessel gets worked on, and as soon as it's worked on, how quickly it's dispatched out of the port. You would see that in Pier 1 in particular, there has been a 36% deterioration, and in Pier 2, unfortunately, a significant 75% deterioration from a performance point of view. The next one on infrastructure. This is a bit of a tricky one, Chair, if I might say, because we were hoping we would have been sitting at about 85% of performance, which would have been 2.087 billion rands expenditure out of a total of 2.4 billion rands, which would have been just about 85% through the last emergency or rather urgent procurement activity, which was acquisition of diesel engines to keep Saldanha and Richards Bay as the bulk export ports up and running and not adversely impacted by load shedding. Unfortunately, some delays, and based on accounting principles, we are unable to include that expenditure, and that's how we sit at that 1.508% billion rands expenditure, which is 61.5%. And just to speak on some of the interventions that we're making to, if you like, turbocharge our performance in capital expenditure, Chair, we're putting in place framework contracts. We have gotten approval for extension of forms of contracting. Historically, we've been contracting using one form, which has been problematic because it has been, if you like, one form of contract which was supposed to be suited to everything, which has not been the case. We have also got approval for alternative forms of dispute resolutions that will expedite any disputes and get the projects to move relatively faster. We're introducing port-by-port project management training, and we're making available tools of trade to our professionals in appropriate tools of trade, including project reporting and port performance tools of trade. We have reassigned professional staff to their areas of strength away from their areas of weakness, whilst we're also proceeding with the training program. And we are also embedding specialized skills in procurement that would be called commodity, that are ordinarily called commodity specialists. So we have infrastructure people, marine engineers, mechanical and electrical engineers embedded in procurement, so that whatever we are procuring is being done by people who have got an intimate knowledge and understanding of the product or the service that they're actually buying. We're also bringing in specialized skills. All projects that are going into the budget would have advanced to a point of state of readiness by way of business cases that have been finalized. And we have also put in place your templates and checks and balances and continuous project reporting. So those are the interventions, Chair, and we are in the throes of that execution. And we're pretty confident that in the next reporting financial year end, all of these problems would have yielded positive results. And the last area, Chair, that we want to talk about in the execution of the landlord function, from a real estate revenue, we overperformed by 5%. We had a target of 4.3 billion rands, and we're sitting at 4.5 billion rands. More importantly, Chair, the last one, which was dubbed Operation Badala, was effectively reduction of debt. And so the reason why you see a green, notwithstanding the reduction in the number, is because we wanted to reduce the debt, and we were targeting that we would have reduced money that is owed to us to 572, and we exceeded that target by 10%, and we are sitting at 518, which means we performed very well. And to move to the next slide, Chair, if we go back to one of the legs of our a reason for existence from a mandate point of view, which is the marine side of it, the marine services. This is the current footprint as we sit, Chair, in particular the tags, which is a critical tool of trade, because those are the boats that nudge vessels and turn them around inside the basin and nudge them gently to sit alongside a berth as well as move them away. You'd see that we're currently sitting at 67% capacity. So notably, with the exception of the workboats, the floating cranes, as well as the luxury boats, but the four others, the launch boats, the pilot boats, the helicopters, and the tugs, we're sitting at around between 57 and 67, which is much lower than we should be having a state at any point in time, nothing below 9%. And part of the strategy is also to build redundancies at a regional level. For each of these particular tags, Chair, some of which are in maintenance, as listed here in below, we have a detailed tracking system, and on a weekly basis, we are monitoring performance of that, and we're chasing specific dates for return of these particular equipment to service. And part of that is to also put maintenance agreements with the OEMs that would enable storage of appropriate parts without us having to carry the adverse consequences of a huge inventory, and ensuring that we focus on planned maintenance, but also ensure that our ship repair facilities are fully functional and they've got the skills and the systems in place to be able to service this particular fleet. If we could move to the next slide, please. And the next slide, Chair, simply emphasizes, elaborates, and on the point that I was actually making. So at the bottom, if I may, just at the bottom with the legend, when you see a green, that would be what is on track. And when you see red, that is a missed delivery. So you would see at the top the helicopters that we're hoping to have purchased. That has been a missed delivery, and I'll go to it. And then you'd see the fleet, which is on the corporate plan with a light green color, as well as the black one, which is not on the corporate plan. I think the point that we're making, Chair, if, for instance, you're looking at the first ones, the two helicopters, those that were delivered towards the end of 21-22, or rather beginning of 21-22. The two helicopters, what were the decisions that have been made, Chair, is that part of improving our competitiveness as an authority is to open up opportunities for all service providers and suppliers of our products, so that we can make sure that we get the best value for money product in the market. Historically, in some instances, we found that we're stuck to one or two type of a product, which of itself might not have been a bad idea, but sometimes for too long without a periodic reviews of whether that is still the best value for money product in the market. So that particular contract of those helicopters, we decided to go back to the building blocks insofar as review of the specifications and ensuring that we go back to the market to again recalibrate where we are, because that particular service has been in place for at least about 20 years, give or take. The point that we're making, Chair, is from fleet point of view across the spectrum, from tugs to helicopters to launch boats, pilot boats to cranes, we have got a specific and a targeted regular reporting template that enables us to keep track of this particular system. And part of conceptually as well, what we're also looking at, ensuring as well that we've got service contracts with private players, so that if and when a crisis arises in our system, we don't leave a port system which does not have the equipment to actually service it, that we're able to actually bring and call upon those private players that would have been procured on a predetermined basis to actually come and supplement that particular service and actually guarantee us a percentage availability without us having to worry about the service of that particular fleet. Next slide, please. And if I may go to the transversal initiatives, insofar again as the services in the marine sector, I've already spoken about the work that we're doing on a continuous basis insofar as making sure that the marine equipment is available. There's a specific focus, Chair, on these ship repair facilities as well as the dry docks, and ensuring that they are aligned with our needs and are also very responsive. And part of this is training of colleagues who are working in these particular facilities and benchmarking them with what actually happens globally. And in some instances, because some of them are as old as 100 years, 120, 130, in those instances where there's old equipment, replacement of some of the old equipment which has gone out of fitness for purpose, and replacing it with new equipment. And in last year's period, and part of it was to also adjust remuneration, adjust positively the remuneration of marine services and align it and also create a much more clearer career path so that we don't bleed skills. And TNPA is a market maker when it comes to skills in this particular area. And therefore, we always need to make sure that we train more than we can take on so that the rest of the industry is able to take on those people that we've also provided training for. Next slide, please. And I'm going towards the end, Chair, just to indicate. This slide gives a sense. On the right-hand side, you'd see the legend, the blue being the installed equipment, as well as the design equipment. This is insofar as the terminals are concerned, and you'd see that iron ore is basically equipped to its full design capacity. But when it comes to containers as well as coal, and you can see that insofar as the operating equipment in these terminals, there's still a gap between what has been equipped and design capacity. But also the important thing here, Chair, is because of the lead times in the creation of additional capacity. The practice is not to wait until you have reached full design capacity before you create new capacity, so that you don't end up having your capacity as a constraint to market demand. So there are various projects that are increasing the capacity in each of these particular segments. So we wouldn't want this slide to misinform and suggest, therefore, that there is no basis to actually increase capacity. And the global practice is that the ports tend to trigger increase in capacity once they reach, give or take, between 75 and 85%, depending on how quick their delivery systems and the maturity of the systems to create the additional capacity that is actually required. So this is an important slide insofar as us monitoring how we are performing. And the next slide, Chair, talks to much more detail of infrastructure capacity. Effectively, the slide, if you look at on the right-hand side, Chair, the slide that we've just come back where you see the colors is in fact a summarized version of that particular column, because it talks to the extent to which a design capacity has been taken up by equipment on the operating side. And we also wanted to just have some better understanding, because what has become apparent, Chair, is that in truth, we are operating a port system that often has got what I would call a lead port insofar as a particular material or cargo that it's handling, and then there would be a supporting port. And often the ratios range from close to 99%, which would be iron ore, which is dominantly in one port, and sometimes they then go up to one port which has got a dominance, give or take, up to about 65-70%, which means you have got a dominant port, and then you often have got a supporting port, and sometimes often a third port. In particular, you'd see that the containers are spread over three ports. I don't want to overdwell on this particular slide. It gives us a sense of which segments are going through which channel, at what level of capacity, and therefore when do we need to be worried about a trigger point to be able to increase the capacity. The next slide, please. And the last slide, Chair, would be the projects which are located in each region that we regard as game changing. For ease of management, we categorized the port system into 3 regions: the eastern region, which is Richards Bay and Durban, and the central region, which is East London, Ngqurha, and Port Elizabeth, as well as the western region. And we have listed these particular projects in accordance to those particular regions. And if I might maybe start in the West Coast, something that is not included here, which is a significant one, which is going through approval processes, would be the port of Gqeberha, which project is well advanced in terms of being to the final phases of requesting specifically targeted companies to give us final proposals of how they could develop that particular initiative. This is a generational project. As you know, the ports, they stay for centuries. It's a significant investment, which would also require rail to connect it with the hinterland, which is the source of where the bulk exports actually come from the Northern Cape. We then have got gas infrastructure that we need to provide for in the Saldanha area, the LPG project in the port of Cape Town, decongestion of the ports, back of port industrial development or back of port operations as epitomized by the Colombo logistics port, and specific intervention to rejuvenate the port of Mossel Bay. Historically was dependent on Petrosa, and we're having to actually think creatively on how to ensure that that facility is put to best use. The same in the central region, and notably would be the relocation of the liquid bulk project, and that project should be going out in the next few weeks. The tanks in the port of Port Elizabeth, in terms of fitness for purpose from an engineering point of view, have run out of their shelf life, and they are a safety hazard amongst other issues. The development of the Ngqurha Manganese Terminal, this would be a seminal project in terms of ensuring that the corridor for manganese is consolidated and capacitated to the appropriate level. And of course, Gqeberha, when it comes on stream, it would also provide a supplementary capacity. And the last one, increasing of the automotive terminal to accommodate increased traffic from Gauteng, in particular, one of the automotive companies that want to use that particular channel, but also making sure that the port of London itself, the capacity is increased through the deepening of the berth, enabling increased vessels to actually come in. And I'll summarize for the Eastern region. This is our epicenter from a development point of view. Re-establishment of Durban as the, if you like, the main hub in the continent, in the form of increasing its capacity from the current 2.9 million TEUs to 11.4 TEUs, and the related, if you like, readjustment and reconfiguration of both ports, because some of the activities that are currently located in the port of Durban, of necessity, will have to be relocated to the port of Richards Bay, and that would include, amongst others, the relocation of the main base to the port of Richards Bay, the increase of the multipurpose terminal to increase capacity for chrome and magnetite, amongst others. And we've got a significant project, the LNG project in Richards Bay, which is a subject of great interest by private players. And our job is to provide common user infrastructure. And at the bottom of this particular slide, Chair, and I'm not going to go into detail, is a number of transversal projects, some pursuing principles of sustainability, ensuring reliability of operations of the ports. These ports are 24-hour business operations, and ensuring that insofar as utility services are concerned, those are available from energy point of view, but also from a water area. In some instances, the coastal areas are in fact drought-stricken areas. And also ensuring, given the change in climatic conditions and therefore the behavior of the seas becoming much more volatile, much more often, hydraulic tension mooring systems to keep the vessels and enable the working on the vessel and reduce the ship turnaround time, amongst others, and a number of other systems that we've already spoken about. And if we go to the next slide, please. And this should be the concluding slide, Chair. And we are hard at work, Chair, and the number of interventions that we've spoken about are in the process of being populated by professional teams, and we're crowding in the appropriate skills so that we can competently execute the mandate. Thank you, Chair.
No, asibonge Pepi. Asimamele ke ngoku uzawuthini uJabu. You can take the podium, Jabu.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair. My apologies. We have load sharing, so my picture will appear to be a little bit dark than usual. My name is Jabu Mdaki, and I'm the Chief Executive of TPT. Going directly to the TPT presentation, we have the segment strategy that we are driving within TPT. Part of that is then the container segment. The main hub of the containers within TPT is Durban, where we service them in Pier 1 and Pier 2, in NCT, in the Eastern Cape, as well as Cape Town. This is something that is actually known. Durban remains the port, the main port for our containers. If I can move on to the next slide, Chair. This is basically the depiction of the port operation. The vessel will be coming in within our anchors, and at that time it will be serviced as Pepi has indicated by TNPA to bring it into the terminals. Once inside the terminal, TPT will be taking over the operation of the vessel. The time that we call it is then, the berth working time or the cargo working time, as we are depicting it here. Once we finish with the vessel, then it will be over to TNPA to be able to sail the vessel, and then it can be able to leave our shores. We measure all these key points because they then are the critical points in terms of us improving our vessel turnaround times as well as our efficiencies. But as TPT has indicated in this vessel, in this picture, we are focusing mainly then on the cargo working time. If I can move on to the next slide, please. The key operational challenges, as the GC here has indicated, the first and foremost is the equipment, the availability and the reliability of our equipment within the ports. Our key equipment for handling the containers is the gantry cranes, ship-to-shore cranes, the land equipment, which is the straddle operators, as well as straddle machines that we operate the containers with, as well as the rubber-tired gantries. The main challenge with that is the age of the equipment. Most of the equipment have exceeded their lifespan, and their replacement is overdue for a number of reasons. And the successful then maintenance of the execution of the maintenance of this equipment is also then impacted by the timely availability of the spares, and also the nature of how we are contracting with the service providers or the OEMs. I'll be touching with regard to the OEMs because that's one of our biggest initiatives that we've undertaken within TPT to address the equipment as well as the serviceability of the equipment. The second one that is work in progress, and we're seeing making good progress in, is the people, in terms of improving the morale of the people, as well as addressing the conditions of fatigue. The shift systems that we have been that we are working and that we are in the process of changing is a system that is not conducive to a proper rest for the employees, and we are in the process of changing that so that we have a more a system that allows for a proper rest. And when you have people on site, then they can be more productive and also then improve the quality of the life of our operators, and then allowing them to be a more productive. The critical skills in the terminal operations will be your operators of the lifting equipment, these are critical skills. We are in the process of training quite a few of them, and some of them have already been deployed to the terminals to make up the number of teams, or as it is normally known within the port system, the gangs, to be able to service the vessels. We are ramping that training up in collaboration with our schools of excellence that is training these operators. If I can move on to the next slide. Within the operations itself, some of the challenges that we deal with, then the first and foremost, if one were to look in a terminal like Cape Town, weather is impacting us quite a lot, especially during the periods of December, January, and February. Now, with that combined with some of the challenges that you'll have with the equipment, it will have a compounding effect that when you recover from the weather or when the bad weather conditions subside, you want to be able to deploy a maximum equipment. With the challenges that we've had with the equipment, that has been difficult, but we are in the process of addressing that. We've put in mitigation in place with the OEMs to deploy them to be able to service, especially on the land side operations of the RTGs. This is not limited to Cape Town, but it is also limited to other terminals as well. Chairperson, we've got what we call is a contracted slots, if I can put it like that, with the shipping lines. That helps to guide us when should the vessel be arriving, what the productivity level will be giving to the vessel, and when then is that vessel departing in our shores. We do that in collaboration with the shipping lines, working quite closely with them. There are a number of initiatives that we are working with them. Some of them are coming from the studies that we have conducted with the World Bank, which I'll be touching on quite shortly. But that also then help us to try and ensure that our operations are planned and the service that we give to the shipping lines is normalized, if I can put it like that. And we try and avoid having the bunching of the vessels outside at anchors. We do have other issues that we also make it quite challenging for us. And most notably, I think PFMA is quite impacting in terms of our SEM processes. Chairperson, I know that the general view is that PFMA will only be impacting you if your planning is not proper. It's not true. We are dealing with the heavy mobile equipment. There are a lot of moving components. When you get a breakdown, you need to be able to react quite quickly. And some of the processes that we have do not necessarily allow us to be able to respond as quickly as we would like to be, in a manner that allows us to get the equipment that is broken down to back into service and service the industry without risking not appearing to have followed the process or transparent procurement processes, which is why we are undertaking some of the initiatives that we're undertaking to have these long-term partnerships with the OEMs, so that we can be able to have then the long-term supply contracts, either of spares or of services, as well as standardize on the equipment that we have within the terminals. If I can move on to the next slide. Jefferson, this is the slide that I was referring to earlier on when I were talking about the cargo waiting time. Coming from the studies that we've had with the World Bank, we set ourselves a target in 2021 to say that we want to reduce the cargo working time by 10%. As can be seen in the graph, for a terminal like Pier 1, we're able to hit it on target, a reduction by 10%. For Pier 2, we were able to reduce it by 7.5%. It's just a marginal improvement. And for NCT, we've seen quite a big improvement. And CTCT is the only one where we are not able to make the necessary improvement. And I've already indicated some of the factors that are impacting us at CTCT. In some of the areas, you can see October that was impacted by the strike. last year, you had some of the vessels, and that would have been staying quite longer than we would have wanted to. This is an ongoing project. It's work in progress, Chairperson. Despite all the challenges that we have, we continue looking at ways and working with the industry to ensure that we streamline our processes, we streamline our planning processes, the collaboration that we're getting from the major exporters and importers to ensure that our terminals become functional. And I'm happy to advise the committee's chairperson that in some of these processes that we have streamlined, we've seen tangible benefits, especially in the auto sector, where we are seeing the level of productivity has gone up. The terminal that has got a capacity to handle about 520,000 units was able to do 620,000 units in the past financial year. And we're embedding some of the learnings and these processes that we're learning, and we're improving on those within other terminals as well. But it also requires the buy-in of the customers and the stakeholders that we work with. The next slide. We have buckets, and I'm not going to talk to individual items, but from the studies that are coming through from the World Bank studies, which are linked to the World Bank rankings, and I've indicated is work in progress. We've divided this in different sections for operations, for people, the planning processes that I've already touched on, the technical actions that is touching on the equipment that I've mentioned, as well as the commercial arrangement. What is it that we are offering commercially, a value for money to ensure that we are able to improve the service offering to the industry, but at the same time, we improve the terminal operations for the betterment of everyone that is using our port systems. Next slide, please. These are similar initiatives, just the previous ones for the Durban terminals. This one is for NCT, and we are following the same process here, Chairperson. The next slide. And this one is for the Cape Town, and again, all these are tracked, and we are reporting on this very closely and continue to collaborate with all the stakeholders as well. Next one. I'm coming to almost at the end. This is the important one, Chairperson. I've already indicated our intent to collaborate with the OEMs. In this instance, we are separately collaborating and looking at long-term partnerships with the OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, as well as the OPMs, which is the original parts manufacturers, so that we can be able to get the quality equipment and components for the critical functionings of our equipment. The equipment that we use at the ports is quite a complex equipment, sensitive, and it works quite hard. A crane is something that is above 300 million rand, and we cannot afford to have an equipment of that value standing, because we're either using substandard components which do not last, they give us the lifespan that we should be getting, or they are failing during the critical operation. So it's important that we have these collaborations in place, so that we can be able to call on the components as we require them, and we know that we're getting quality components. Once this is concluded, then that will ensure that our equipment availability and reliability is improving. It's going to be a hard work. It's going to be a work that we undertake and take us some time to get to the ideal position. But I'm happy to say that we have done the heavy lifting, and we've over the difficult processes. We are in the process of concluding these procurement processes. And the next one. Chairperson, I think that was the last one, but as I've indicated, the same as we're doing with the OEM and the OPM, we are also looking at the long-term partnership with the OEMs for the supply of equipment so that we can be able to standardize on the equipment that we've got within the ports and be able to stabilize and optimize our port operations. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Jabu. Let's now welcome Ubongos.
Thank you, Chair. A good morning to Honorable Minister, the honorable members, Chair, and colleagues. Just to kick off and maybe provide a bit of a snapshot of how TFR is structured in terms of its operations. We are structured in a form of corridors, with each corridor focusing predominantly on a specific commodity. We have the North Corridor, which is predominantly coal-oriented, Northeast Corridor, which is mostly chrome magnetite, Ore Corridor, which is iron ore, Cape Corridor, more manganese, Container Corridor, which is self-explanatory, and the Central Corridor. If you look at contribution in terms of each corridor, you will note that a sizable portion of our business comes predominantly from two corridors, those being the North and Northeast Corridor, which accounts for 52% of our revenue, similarly 52% of volumes. Now, the importance of that and the significance of that is that when you look at our key binding constraints, and Portia has spoken quite in detail around some of our challenges, you will note that the issue of locomotives, the long-standing locomotives that we struggle with, are predominantly assigned to the North Corridor and the Northeast Corridor. Therefore, what that means is we are losing significant volumes in our significant contributors in terms of corridors across our business. There is impact in other corridors in relation to the locomotives, but most of the challenges in relation to that are on the North Corridor and the Northeast Corridor. Equally, when you then take a step further, you will note that security incidents, which again, Aluani, Portia, and the Minister alluded to earlier, are also focused predominantly on the North Corridor, which runs our coal, and also on the Container Corridor. We are seeing quite a significant erosion of capacity and value as a result of security-related incidents. Without taking too much time on this, just for context, in the previous financial year, 2021-22, we lost about 1.7 million meters of cables across our network, about which translated is 1,700 kilometers of cable stolen. Much as we are fighting a winning battle, because the year after that, which is 22-23, we were able to arrest that and reduce the number from 1,700 kilometers to 1,100 kilometers, which accounts for about 33% of reduction in terms of the cable length stolen in our line. It still remains a critical area of erosion of value in terms of the volumes that we run as a business. Lastly, in terms of our key binding constraints, then comes the issue of infrastructure. Portia spoke quite in detail around that, and I won't unpack that further. Safe to say, we remain with the challenge of some of our flows, or rather areas in the network that remain with systemic underinvestment, and therefore cannot carry the design capacity in terms of moving trains. So with these being our challenges, and particularly with a clear vision of what are the limiting factors for our performance as a business, we've therefore come up with an approach and a strategy that is embedded in 5 pillars. If you can move on to the next slide. So in order for us to stabilize the business and turn it around, we've reapproached how, of course, we are managing the business in 5 pillars. The first area of focus being to immediately stop the bleeding. Stopping the bleeding is an approach that focuses on what can we do now? We are aware of the limitations in the three areas that I've touched on. We know that the CRRC locals are not going to come back now, as in within a day. We know that security incidents are not going to be arrested by tomorrow. Equally, we know that the maintenance work that needs to be done will not be carried over in a space of a day. So what are we doing now? Our first point of call is to return some of the long-standing locals as most as possible in the shortest space of time. Now, I've mentioned earlier that we know that CRRC is not going to be realized in a space of a day, but equally we are aware that CRRC is not the only OEM that has supplied us with locomotives under the 1064 transaction, and therefore we focused on the other OEMs to ensure that we bring back as many of those locomotives as possible. We've further gone out on an open market with a confinement approach and then target those OEMs that are able to work on the locomotives such as Alstom, Mitsui, in order to bring back as many of those as possible. We further negotiated maintenance reliability services agreements with these OEMs. Predominantly, our contracting with OEMs would be insofar as them supplying us with spare parts and of course supplying us with expertise where necessary. Our approach this time around is to say to them, they need to guarantee availability of locomotives for our operations. And as a result, whatever resources they require to bring on board, they guarantee that a certain percentage in terms of performance of those locomotives will be always available for our operations. The third element to our stopping the bleeding is around the container corridor. I think it has been spoken quite widely that the container corridor loses about 3.5 billion rands for Transnet. It is a loss leader in the business, and as a result, erodes value insofar as what the business is able to earn and yield from our other operations. So the approach there is to say, given the high requirements for maintenance in that corridor, we definitely are unable to fund from our own balance sheet to the tune of 5 billion rands that is required as a minimum in investments in maintaining the container corridor. And therefore, we cannot immediately up performance, especially competing with road, which is subsidized to Durban. And for that reason, the approach is then to say, let's find a partner that is then going to invest in the maintenance. And of course, that will take away from the business the 3.5 billion rands losses that we currently account for in our books. The fourth and final area of focus in us saying we are immediately stopping the bleeding is around our tariffing. In analyzing our tariffs, we realized that there are big gaps insofar as our ability to recover costs across the different corridors. Some of it is as a result of strategies that were implemented in the past that were not later on reviewed for effectiveness and efficiencies. Those strategies would include market penetration in some cases. They would include economic enablement in other areas. But of course, that was intended to cultivate a volume movement and develop some corridors and businesses. We then cannot continue to under-recover in those flows on the basis of potential volume growth, where it's demonstrated over years that the volumes are not growing. And therefore, we've had to go back to some of the flows that are under-recovering, but are also making good margins. You'll be surprised to note that flows such as coal, where margins were as high as they were with the market boom, had some areas in those flows where we are under-recovering costs. So those are immediate steps that we've taken already, not work that is to be done in the future. That's work that has been done immediately to have a bit of a shock impact on the business. The next layer is then to say, let's stabilize our corridor operations. Primary focus here, still on the same slide. The primary focus, and I'll try and summarize the rest of the 5 pillars. The primary focus here being on things that we can do that will have an immediate impact on operations directly. Security improvements that is underpinned by a different contracting regime with our service providers. I think Luani indicated earlier that our area of focus is partnerships with the industry in security, and some of our customers have come to the party to support quite significantly in these initiatives. But we are saying, moving forward, we want to contract with the security service providers, not for the resources that they bring into service, but rather for the impact that those resources will have. So our service providers in terms of security will be paid on the basis of the reduction of incidents and cable length stolen, rather than on the basis of a number of security guards that they've brought into the system. We are also focusing on procurement overhaul. There we are saying items that are long lead in nature and that we know are constantly required in the business, we will fast track entering into medium to long-term contracts with the service providers in order to give effect to readily available parts and whatever items are required by the business as one of the areas. We are saying across our procurement processes, we need to then say, what levers do we need to enable in order to support the business better with our buying operations? Operational optimization, I will touch on that later. There are slides that are focusing on initiatives around that, and then back of port facilities as well. The third pillar, which is more around us structuring our operations such that we optimize and sweat the asset as best as we can, is around the digitalization of the business. As it is now, we've got many of our processes, and this is a historic issue. We've got many of our areas of operations that are manual in nature. What that means is we are unable to leverage of new technologies that are able to improve planning and reduce safety incidents in our lines, that are able to detect potential safety hazards before they occur, and of course reduce cost of service. We are looking at an integrated approach in terms of our digital systems across the board, which will then give effect to efficiencies. And of course, we are looking to fast track infrastructure programs. Pepe touched on the Ngqurha Manganese project, which will also have a rail leg to it, which will be at around 10 billion rands. We are engaging insofar as rolling that and fast tracking the implementation thereof. That will immediately yield an increase in volumes on rail, much as the project is envisaged to be implemented and commissioned in 2027. But as work is done on the line, capacity will become available over the time between 2024-25 up to 2027-28. In scalable fashion, capacity will be made available. There are other long lead long-term projects that we are focusing on, such as in the Northeast Corridor, the line between Maputo and Richards Bay, and we are looking at customers as well to come to the party. The last part of our approach in strengthening the performance of the business is to focus on market selection and increase profitability. I've highlighted earlier that there are areas of the business that are grossly under recovering, even though those markets or those industries are able to sustain quite healthy margins in their markets. And we are therefore saying, as a business, with the limited resources that we have, with the shortage of locomotives, with the network that is ailing, we need to focus our resources where we are able to yield a return that will be able to fund whatever maintenance and expansion we require as a business. If you can move on to the next slide. Now, focusing specifically on the locomotives. I've indicated we are not waiting for CRRC. Conversations are still ongoing there to sort of find common grounds for the return of the standing locomotives there. But for other OEMs such as Alstom, we've already reached some agreements, and we are starting to see those locomotives coming back into service. In the month of April alone, we received 2 of the locomotives, In May, we received another 3. And when one more, which made the total 3, we are expecting 3 more in the month of June. The approach that we are taking there is to say, coal being our hardest hit operation, let's find locomotives across the business that are suited to run on the coal line and take those to coal and then plug the gaps where we would have left the gaps then in other areas. And for that reason, the Alstom locomotives that we are bringing back are not suitable for coal, for the North Corridor, but we are bringing them back into other flows where they will free up then 922Es, which are then predominantly used in coal. That will immediately yield about 1.3 million tons in terms of coal that we can move in addition to what we are currently moving. Within the month of June still, we are also fast-tracking, bringing on board D45s, amongst many others from, again, Alstom and Webtech. And in July, another 4. We are looking at an additional 8 locomotives that will be brought back between June and July from the perspective of the diesels. That's going to yield another 4 million tons. And we are still in negotiations, and we are quite close to locking those in with Webtech and Alstom again to bring another 38 locomotives within the second quarter of the financial year, which will immediately unlock another 5.4 million tons. Additionally, we are looking at another 4 sets of D45s, which will be focused on a new solution in East London, which I will touch on later. Those we are expecting back in October. And then the biggest impact will come from a further 23Es that are long-standing. We're looking at 47 of them and 74 other Webtech-based locomotives. And those we are pushing out. We do not want to be over-ambitious in our approach in forecasting for these coming back. And we are therefore saying by 2025, that will immediately unlock another 30 million tons of capacity in the event that we land this on time. So in terms of locomotives, we are very clear. We know there's an issue with CRRC. We are parking that while work is being done around that, but we are focusing on all other locomotives that we can bring back into service as it is now. If we can move on to the next slide and focus more on the container corridor now. I did touch on it to say the container corridor is a loss leader for TFR. We cannot continue with business as usual in a corridor that requires significant investment in terms of maintenance on the line, but that equally recovers only 20% of the money that we spend in it. If you look at those point number 2, revenue limitations, we spend a rand in the corridor and we recovered between 20 and 45 cents of what we've spent. And that's a systematic issue in that the key competitor there being road is subsidized primarily in terms of their ability to run, number one. Number two, because road is not subjected to these safety and security incidents, it's therefore not limited in terms of its flexibility, and you can switch on and off road at any stage depending on the pressure and the demand. And for that reason, we are finding that we continue to lose about 3.5 billion rands in our bottom line directly coming from the container corridor. And until such time that we are able to successfully maintain the line and ensure that there's better security measures in limiting number of incidents in terms of cable theft, we will continue to be subjected to that. So we are out in the market looking for a partner that will invest in the infrastructure and equally looking at the security measures that I've spoken about to try and arrest that, to assist, better assist the economy of the country. If you'll remember, this corridor supports significantly manufacturing in the country. It's at the back. It's a backbone of manufacturing, and therefore it needs to be kept alive for the benefit of the economy. If you can move on to the next slide, where we are focusing now mainly on digitalization. I've indicated that we are out in the market looking for a digital partner, a partner that will see to the integration of the various systems that we have across the business. That will be the systems all the way from demand forecasting from the customer side to train planning, train execution, moving all the way up to billing. Right now, as it is, we have multiple systems, some of which are dinosaurs insofar as their age of use in the business, and we've been left behind quite significantly in the international railways, in that other railways are using high-end state-of-the-art technologies that yield efficiencies. If I can pick one out of the many areas of focus of this in train execution, we are quite confident that with an integrated train planning tool, we will be able to eliminate cancellations by 15% immediately. We'll be able to plan our trains better because with a manual system, there is a margin of safety, a safety net that you effect in your planning, and therefore you do not plan to the T every train back to back, and as a result, you lose value. With a system that is more efficient in planning, you'll be able to maximize each and every slot that you can plan on the rail line, just amongst many other benefits. You are talking visibility of train movement and traction, real-time scheduling abilities, and replanning, because that also becomes a nightmare in the event that we have to deviation manage in our system. So that's a very big area, and it will be a game changer once we have systems talking to each other, literally from customer all the way to an invoice being sent across to the customer. Next slide. Now, going back to what I referred to as stop the bleeding, we are also saying where we can start new services and where there is enough demand from our customers, let's go ahead and commence activating those new services. And as part of that, we are focusing on, I see the slides have gone off, if you can put it back up. I'll talk to it in the interim. We are focusing on East London as a new solution that will run for manganese. That is in the pipeline for implementation by 1st of July. We are well underway to start running manganese into that port, and we anticipate quite a significant improvement in terms of volumes and revenue. Equally, we've recently announced that we are expanding a loop in the Northern Cape for manganese in the Mamatwan area, which will support and underpin a growth in terms of volumes of about 1.5 million tons. That will enable 4.4 billion rands in foreign earnings for the economy, but equally will increase revenue for Transnet. Again, that project is underway for finalization by 31st of July, meaning that within the second quarter of the financial year, we'll start removing about 40,000 trucks off the road from that solution. We are also focusing with a partnership with a customer on an investment in security that will see to an increase in volumes through our Cape Town terminal by 500,000 tons, which will be equivalent to 1.1 billion rands in foreign earnings for the economy. All of these are led for purposes of ensuring that while we solve the other issues, we leverage off the slots that we have available and the resources that we have available where customers are willing to come and partner with us. Next slide, please. Equally on chrome and magnetite, we've piloted successfully from 1st of May, a new concept where our trains that move to Maputo will no longer be subjected to these long changeovers in the border between Maputo and South Africa. What we do there is we will have trains running directly from Maputo without stopping at the border all the way to the mines and back. That will immediately improve our efficiencies by 23%. In fact, we've piloted that successfully and it's now on full production, and we are immediately seeing results of that already. We've also lengthened the trains that go to Maputo to 160 wagons, which will immediately give us an ability to earn an additional 12.9 billion rands in foreign earnings with 6.4 million tons of capacity. These are, again, quick wins that do not require significant investment, things that we can unlock within the resources that we have as an organization. Next slide, please. Now, talking export coal and infrastructure capabilities, there are projects also that we are rolling out there where we are restoring slot capacity. We actually started off in the iron ore line. Work was done from January this year and was completed by April, and we started immediately. We restored the line on the ore line back to its full capacity of 35 trains a week. We started ramping up, and as of last week, 2 weeks ago rather, we were very stable at about 33 trains a week, which was very close to the full 100% capacity by virtue of us having done work and geotechs in the line. Similarly, we are taking that approach in coal as well, and we anticipate that with the work having been completed in April already, the ramp up has commenced on the coal line. We anticipate to be at steady state within the second quarter of the financial year with an increase of 2.8 million tons in throughput as well. In restoring capacity, our primary focus is again on our replacement of tubular track in MLO yard, which will enable an additional 3 million tons. Again, work that is currently on the go for completion by 31 July. In the interest of time, Chair, I will not be focusing a lot of detail in this. If you can move on to the next one as we wrap up. Container corridor, I've spoken to mostly. I will not touch on it again. We are very clear there around the partnership that we are looking into. But in the interim, after the floods, we've been focusing on bringing that line back into its full production, which is 42 slots coming from 15, which we're realizing post the floods. And we are ramping up quite nicely there and anticipate that we'll have another 2.4 million tons realized by 2 July. And then lastly, on iron ore, I've spoken about the work that we've done from January in improving and maintaining the line. And therefore, we anticipate another 4 million tons to be realized through enabling back of ports along with increased manganese as well into that corridor. Again, that's work that we anticipate to have in place by 30 June 2023. Chair, I will pause there and hand back to you, to Portia, perhaps, to wrap up, and we will then move forward. Thank you so much.
Chair, I'm mindful of the time that we've taken, so I really am just going to this last slide, which has given all of the coverage that we've been getting. And I also, I suppose, as a result of the rail white paper, the National Rail White Paper, as well as the work that we're doing, just that reflects a lot of of what has been presented by the various CEOs. What you have going forward, and just to focus on the green side, which is the new modern enterprise, between the digitization that Ngqozi talks about inside TFR, we have a chief of digital in Transnet, who is systematically working with the various operating divisions where we're converting what were manual processes into digital processes. It takes time, given the scoping of what needs to be done, but also once done, will ensure that we will be as efficient as we possibly can be as well on the administrative side of the company. Much of, I'll just talk in the case of Transnet Engineering, there is a RFP that we've got in the market where we're looking for a partner. And fundamentally what we're looking for is a partner who has cash, who can help us set up a leasing company, the existence of which is actually quite crucial for ensuring that we have a successful third-party access environment once this opens up at the beginning of October this year. TNPA is already made. In the case of Transnet Pipelines, we are participating in the LNG, and actually this is liquid natural gas. Our biggest contribution is via the Lily pipeline, which currently carries methane-rich gas from Secunda via Mbangeni into Durban. The plan is to resize that pipeline, re-sleeve it, and then redirect the flow so that it connects to the new LNG terminal and is able to supply LNG into the Gauteng region as well as into KZN. We're hoping that we will get interested parties who can then ensure that we are able to actually ensure our LNG distribution into Richards Bay as well. In the case of Transnet Properties, it's been turning around quite nicely. Lots of partnerships that we're entering into. We are paying attention to all of the derelict properties that we have everywhere, in certain instances demolishing, and in other instances, some MPOs are approaching us for use of those properties. The Carlton Centre is out in the market. It closes on the 5th of June. It's really important for us. That revenue is important. We needed to be able to refinance and fund Transnet Properties in its developments going forward, on the one hand, but secondly, it's important in releasing that asset into the market so that there could be faster development to ensure that there is a investment inside the Johannesburg CBD. There are lots of other properties that they're working with. It would be remiss of me not to end with our ongoing problem. You would know that we have a couple of hostels. We have over the years tried to dispose of them, and at various points have had some government entity or the other expressing interest. When we then come to them and say, fine, we're interested, go ahead, we would then get impossible requests, such as they'll buy it from Rand, and we must provide them with maintenance support for the next 5 years. We cannot do that. We really need to close on the hostels. If we are able to close the hostels, Transnet Properties becomes a very solid company. But Chair, honourable members and Minister, Deputy Minister, if I could stop at this point, I'm aware that we've taken a lot of time, but I hope we've provided a lot of coverage and colour as to the initiatives that are taking place in Transnet, especially with regards to the 3 operating divisions that have presented. Thank you very much.
Oliver. Honorable members, that's the presentation in its entirety. And I want now to give you the opportunity, members, to interact with this presentation by way of asking questions of clarity, making comments, and even suggested solutions where you think that there might be a need to do so. Members can raise their hands in the platform. Can the Secretariat advise me there, because my gadget is not user-friendly, to give me an indication of the members who have raised their hands?
I'm number
Amanda,
1.
I've got Honorable Ngwenya.
I'm number 1, Chair.
Honorable Bibi,
Following
then
by
Honorable
Mama
Nana.
Bibi, following by
Honorable Bibi would be number 2.
Honorable Nana.
Honorable Nana would be number 3.
Honorable Nana, number 3. Honorable Tebuho, number 4.
Honorable Gqeberha Modise would be number 4.
Yes.
In that order, honorable members, let's give you the opportunity, Honorable Ngwenya. I see you are staging a coup here.
Thanks very much, Chair. I need to go load shedding, so we wanted to make quickly before it spoke. Thanks for the presentation. Honorable Chairperson, my questions are as follows. During the State of the National Address of the 2023, President Ramaphosa stated that Transnet will develop a roadmap that will translate policy commitment into reality. Now, Chair, my question, I want to check what is the state of the readiness of the roadmap, and has it been developed? And if yes, can we get the details? And if no, why not? The second question, Chair, what are the developments regarding the restructuring of the Transnet freight rail that was set by the President during the SONA 2023, that it will create a separate infrastructure infrastructure manager for the rail network. Can we get an update on this restructuring? And also, I want to check, Chair, how many of Transnet ports had internationally terminally operation to assist Transnet to have a direct link to key trading partners? The fourth one, Chair, on port terminal. The presenter mentioned that there is a shortage of people and skills, but you did not mention the timelines regarding your plan to fill the vacancies, and what are your timeline and recruitment plan to fill all vacancies. We want a plan with timeline. The fifth question, Chair, I want to check whether the ports of Mossel Bay, Richard Bay, and Salda Bay are making any profit. During our meeting with you last year, you mentioned that these ports are not making profit, and you promised to do something to improve the situation. I want to check, Chair, that has the situation improved? And if yes, can we get the details? If no, why not? Lastly, but not least, Chair, Honorable Chairperson, I wanted to check if there are any vacancies in the board. If yes, how many vacancies does the board have, and when will they be filled? And also, I want to check that is it these vacancies funded? Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. You said you were going to ask 2 questions. You ended up asking 6 questions.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm Nandoba straight, only 2 questions, not more than that.
Okay, Mama.
Okay, good morning, Chairperson Baba, and also the Minister, and also the colleagues and the department. Honorable Chairperson, firstly, I'm looking at your intervention to increase capacity, Minister, both for your ports and freight businesses. And I'm thinking, in monetary terms, where will the money come from? That is from your balance or from your, is it going to be from your balance or from the National Treasury? My last question, Chairperson, it will be, have you at this stage been able to secure any private equity partners in working with you in any of your capacity expansion projects? And I heard you with your presentation that you were also talking about the private partners. So my question is on that. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Mama PB. Let's now invite Honorable Nana. Honorable Nana, the floor is yours.
Yeah, enkosi kakhulu Gqeberha, ndiyabulela ngelithuba. Good morning. Good morning, colleagues. From the onset, I think I need to mention that Transnet came well prepared. The presentations were quite extensive. You can see that there has been an effort put into these presentations. And for that reason, having gone through the presentations myself, I have quite a lot of clarity-seeking questions. But in the interest of time, I will confine myself to a few questions, and the rest of the other questions, I'll probably send them to the ministry and the department in a form of written questions for written replies. Chairperson, board member Alwani, and apologies if I'm if I'm murdering your surname, mentioned a collaboration between Transnet and the mining industry. And I do think it's something that really needs to be applauded. I know it's been ongoing, but the fact that it's something that Transnet is really taking serious, it has to be applauded. And I guess colleagues know where I am going with this matter. I would want to check, because in the last meeting we held with Transnet, I raised the issue of manganese on our roads and the detrimental effect it has, in particularly in the Eastern Cape to Nelson Mandela Bay. And I know, colleagues, I am risking to sound like a broken record here, but it's a matter that is very serious to that community. And in your response in the last engagement we had with Transnet, Transnet made it clear that, in fact, that is the responsibility of the Department of Transport, and I accepted that. But beyond that, you committed to engage with mining companies as Transnet in trying to resolve the matter. I would want to check whether the collaboration referred to by the board member includes this thorny issue of roads, of trucks on our roads, particularly those going to Nelson Mandela Bay. The second question I have is on your debt collection. Ngqeberha, in his presentation, did mention that you are making strides in your debt collection drive. Now, I would want to check which mechanisms are you using. I'm not asking for company secrets. Which mechanisms are you using in your debt collection? Does this include debt collectors as in private companies? If the answer is yes, do you find value for money in engaging services of debt collectors? And are they not actually eating from the revenue that you seek to improve and the money you're collecting at the present moment? And of course, all of what I've asked at the tail end of this question really depends on your initial answer, whether you have enlisted services of debt collectors. And the third question, Chairperson, you will recall that the Minister of Finance has made available about 5.8 billion to improve infrastructure efficiency. And I would want to check how has this money been spent, and are there noticeable improvements? If yes, please can you spell a few of them for us? And Ubhutsha Bumdagi mentioned in fact gave us some information with regards to the performance of our ports. But I seem to recall that in the past, there was a target set of about 35 cranes to be moved in an hour. I think this is the fourth or fifth parliament. I would want to check how are you guys comparing insofar as movement of crates on an hourly basis compared to the targets that you guys have set for yourselves in the past? And to Minister Gqeberha, I would want to check, Minister, what is your vacancy rate in the board of Transnet? And if there are any vacancies, what impact do those vacancies have on the operations of the board at Transnet? And the second question, I recall sometime last year, there was a ban, a 6 months ban on scrap metal. I would want to check, Minister, are you satisfied with the outcomes of that ban, or you think there is more work needs to be done? Because here is Transnet. I mean, Mrs. Poshia in her opening remarks was lamenting the theft of over 13 kilometers of cable, which I think it's a serious matter. So I really want to check, has the ban, the 6 months ban on cable theft, on scrap metal trading, did it achieve its desired results, and what's the plan going forward? And the last two questions, I'm sorry for being long, Chair. The last two questions is to Ubud. You've mentioned, which I think it's alarming, that we're spending R1 and yet the return in investment, it's between 20 and 40 cents on the container corridor. And I did follow it closely as you were, presenting, but I would want to check, from what I could gather when you were presenting, I got a sense that most of the risk in the container corridor really lies with cable theft. I would want to check, because I'm asking this question knowing that there is a case in Nelson Mandela Bay of a syndicate, and a leader of that syndicate who was arrested for container theft. How much of a risk is the actual container theft in our terminals? And does it form part of the loss that you alluded to in slide 26? Thank you very much, Ngqurha. I'm sure manganese going through the port of East London will bring life to the city of East London. It's truly appreciated. As you know, I'm from the Eastern Cape, and in the NCOP we are largely provincial buyers. But please, I see you will be reducing trucks on the road to about 13, at a rate of about 13,000 per annum. But please, if you can, keep trucks on the roads to East London to a bare minimum. They have caused a lot of havoc in Nelson Mandela Bay. We wouldn't want to see the repetition in East London. Other than that, thank you very much for the initiative. I'm sure the people of East London will be quite happy to hear that their port will be quite busy. And lastly, Sis Portia, on the closure of Carlton Center. I read about it in the papers. I am not contesting the closure of the property, but really my worry is the rampant nature of hijacking of buildings and illegal occupation of buildings, particularly in the CBD of Johannesburg. Have you guys put in place measures to ensure that property doesn't fall prey to illegal occupation and also building hijackers? Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks a lot for your indulgence. Thank you.
Modise. Honorable Temple Modise.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Let me greet my colleagues and the Honorable Minister and Deputy Minister and the board members and all officials from the Department of Public Enterprise. Chair, some of my questions are covered by my colleagues. Let me start by this one. What are the costs estimated of your intervention to improve efficiency or expand capacity? And secondly, do you have time frame for these projects, when they will be implemented and completed? The last comment, Chair, it's let me welcome the board for the initiative to work with the mines, because from time to time when we go to our oversight, this issue of the trucks that are carrying the minerals or your manganese and any minerals, it's raised by the department, people from the community. So we welcome that suggestion. We hope it will work very well. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Modise. Thank you, members, for those questions. Is there any other member that I might have missed? I know that Honorable Nkause was struggling with the network. Maybe that became a permanent situation. Okay, let me move on. I think let me start off by expressing my appreciation to you, Minister, as well as Transnet. Transnet never disappoints whenever they come to the committee, since during the time I've been at the helm as the chair of this committee. As Honorable Nanda has alluded to that fact that they are always coming here fully prepared. And it is important that it's not just a case of them taking us seriously. I think it is a case of them taking their job at hand quite very seriously. This kind of professionalism and ethical leadership has to be appreciated and condoned, so to say, so that it can be emulated elsewhere across the spectrum of public enterprise. We are in a critical period as a country, and therefore, when you see some of the talented patriots of our country taking their task in a very responsible and in a very diligent way, it really has to be applauded. Having said that, especially I think last year or early this year, I had asked a question in relation to what we have referred today as the barrage of theft, which occurs specifically for the cables. I had asked a question which I wish to repeat. What would be the most appropriate way of dealing with this if you were to compare in the scale of economics between taking an insurance and simply replacing whenever there is an occurrence of this nature? My question, simply put, is that do you take insurance for this kind of infrastructure that Transnet owns, so that if an unfortunate situation of vandalism or theft occurs, then you know that you have a contingency plan to minimize the costs? Because I assume that in a country like ours, where indeed there's a barrage of vandalism to public property, as well as the barrage of theft, as you put it, I'm sure it is quite very expensive to deal with the repairs, let alone the maintenance. That's the first question. The second question linked to that, I assume that you've got counterparts who use the similar infrastructure as you do as Transnet, particularly as it talks to rail. Your natural counterparts would be PRASA and other train related businesses. Do you compare notes with them? Because the same is certainly happening. I'm asking that question because if we don't pay attention to the detail, you may find that in the Xhosa expression, there is what is called ukufa kusembiseni, which means that you may find that some of the people who do this are stealing from John in order to fix what they had already stolen elsewhere. You find that they're exchanging the same materials, stealing from Transnet, fixing where they had stolen 2 months back from PRASA, and you find that it becomes a revolving kind of theft. In that equation, for them, it is a self-centeredness form of enriching their own instrument in order to maximize profit at the expense of the nation and at the expense of the services that are expected to be delivered to the people. So the question is, do you compare notes and exchange experiences so that you are not played by cartels that are responsible for what is actually happening in the country? That's the first question. The second question, it relates to what Bupepi Slinger referred to. He says that you have overperformed on real estate by more than 5%, if I heard him correctly, to the extent that you have made a profit of about 4.5 billion. The simple question that I wish to ask is that, do you ever declare a dividend to your shareholder? Because more often than not, you find that SOEs, they would make the profit, but you never hear that there is transfer of monies to the shareholder. You only hear when they are in trouble, when they need some kind of a capex or a bailout, but you never see money moving the other way around. So I just want to hear that, because we met with the minister, his department, about a week and a half ago, and they were telling us that one of the entities actually declared a dividend. I was quite taken aback by that, because I've not had such a situation in a long time. So it would be very interesting to hear from you on that score. Thirdly, but maybe you were also talking to the fleet and items that you have procured in the marine space, and some that you could not meet the targets for one reason or the other. I saw that there was a gap or a blind spot which I identified. I didn't hear you referring to a submarine. Now, I'm a person who believes that we ought to take security as a condition rather than an option. So when we are managing the assets of the country, we should not only look at the surface, but we must dig deep and drill down so that we also see what is happening under the surface, so to say, especially in the seafront. So in your fleet, do you have submarines? And if you don't, what instrument do you use to ensure that your eyes are wide open above the surface and below the surface? Linked to that, I did not also hear you referring to the drones. Do you have drones as part and parcel of your fleet? And then fourthly, I just want to check, is the load shedding affecting your systems in any way? Or you have solid backup to be able to deal with the situation when it arises? Because it's something that we experience as a country, and I always worry that a huge operation like Transnet, how does it deal with this situation? And I'm asking this question because the prophets of doom who always write very destructive articles, whether they are syndicated journalists but you sort of hear in their narrative that they want to suggest that Transnet may be heavily affected by load shedding in one way or the other. I would like you to take us into confidence insofar as that is concerned. And lastly, I want to talk to Transnet as an instrument of infrastructural development, both in our country and the expected role that Transnet can play in the Africa agenda. You did not touch on that. And I want to understand the medium-term, long-term view of Transnet insofar as meeting some of the policy imperatives as outlined in the National Development Plan, insofar as the chapter that is dealing with Africa agenda, particularly on the issues that are related to transport, logistics, the road network, the rail network for the continent, because Transnet next year as a transformed entity. Remember that from 1994, when the new leadership took over the reins of power, one of the things that we had to do was to transform Transnet from a shelter employment organization into this progressive instrument for infrastructure development in our country, but also into an enterprise that is able to make money, but at the same time meet the requirements of the new dispensation in ensuring that we have a balanced approach in bringing infrastructure to our communities. But the mandate of Transnet is to partner with the rest of the progressive components in the continent to ensure that we meet our developmental objectives in the continent. So it's important that when we get a briefing of this nature, when you talk to transformation and you talk to the medium-term, long-term plans of the country and the continent, that we don't miss the boat, because Transnet is not only about making profits so that we've got major cash reserves, but it's an issue of a long-term benefit into changing the outlook of the country and the outlook of the continent, if I may put it that way. So this is an instrument that is very key for the country and the continent, and therefore this briefing would be incomplete without you touching on that subject. Those will be my questions to both Transnet executives led by Mrs. Portia and the other CEOs, as well as the minister. And just as a parting shot, when we received this document of the presentation, I saw the name of one of the CEOs, Ms. Cesar Mzimela, and I see that she has been replaced by Mr. Mabaso. What does that mean? Because there was no apology registered. It would be nice if you can just indicate. We don't like to be surprised. Sometimes it's just important that even if maybe she's just off sick or off because or else she's deployed elsewhere, just for us to know. I don't want to take that for granted, because in what was shared with us yesterday, her name was there. So I don't know whether Mr. Mabaso is now the acting CEO of that entity. Thank you very much. Let's give it back to you, Minister. You will decide whether you come first or you will come at the end, but you are the leader of the delegation and the head of the ministry. You will indicate how you want to tackle the questions. Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you very much to Sis Portia, to Pepe Slinga, Mr. Mdaki, as well as Mr. Mabaso. This has been quite a very meaningful presentation. We really appreciate when you really do your work in the manner that is satisfactory. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come in at the beginning and at the end. Just on your point about Mr. Mzimela, the CEO did apologize right at the beginning on her behalf. She's had a bereavement in her family. Very tragically, her son had passed away a few days ago, and that's why she's unable to join us today. So that's the explanation as far as Ms. Mzimela is concerned. In relation to Honorable Ngqurha's questions, the Transnet roadmap is in preparation with Operation Vulindlela from Presidency, Department of Transport, and one or two other role players. And we hope that by the end of June, we will have a product to talk about, both within government and with Parliament as well. As far as the restructuring of TFR is concerned, Ms. Darby can give you more details, but the infrastructure manager unit, let's call it that, is in the process of being established, and you can get further details from the CEO in a moment. As far as TPT is concerned, Chair, I think we've got to start preparing. This isn't an ordinary case of if there's a vacancy, fill it up as you do in the public service. More recently, I've had the opportunity to look at the operations in the Singapore port and a port called Tianjin in China. And both those ports are almost fully automated with very few people involved. So we've got to start a process where for efficiency purposes, we start upgrading the skills of our workers so that they can move higher up in the value chain as well. So perhaps from a people point of view, our Transnet colleagues can indicate what the efforts they're putting into this, but that is the future. If we are to compete as ports, both on the African continent, but elsewhere, and if we are to attract shipping lines to our ports as well. On the question of Mossel Bay...
Is the internet working?
Sorry, who's Beverly Walters? On the case, in the case of those three ports, the Transnet colleagues will respond. Two of the colleagues have raised the question of the board. There are vacancies on the board. They are under consideration within government at this point in time. And I'm hoping that by the end of June, we will replenish the board, but also look at the new types of skills that we might require in the board as well. Honorable Bibi has made reference to where does the money come from. A lot of the money comes from within Transnet itself, except for the 5 billion odd allocation, which the Transnet colleagues will explain, that Honorable Nana referred to. And of course, money will come from private partners that would respond to the various RFPs that Transnet has put out. And again, the CEO will take you through some of those that have been and are being processed by Transnet at the moment. In respect of Honorable Nana's questions, the collaboration, two of the colleagues have made reference to the mining industry. Yes, there is this collaboration, but the mining industry still has the habit of, on the one hand, engaging in what appear to be constructive discussions, and on the other hand, running to the media every time it suits them. So I'm particularly unhappy with that. Yesterday, again, there were public comments coming from the CEO of the Minerals Council, and they must make up their minds. Either they want to talk constructively and engage constructively with government, or they must choose otherwise as well. As far as manganese on the roads is concerned, as Honorable Nana pointed out and Mr. Mabaso pointed out, if you look at the slide, unfortunately, I don't have the number in front of me, that makes reference to TFR quick wins on manganese. A lot of effort is going into getting trucks off the road. And it'll be good to get feedback from people like Honorable Nana in terms of whether by July or August this year there's a noticeable difference, because there are targets in that slide about the number of trucks that could be, inverted commas, removed from utilization of roads. And in any event, whether it is commodities or containers or any other product, government policy position is to have a net movement of transport from road to rail. And a lot more effort will have to go into that. And certainly in the case of manganese, we can respond to that. On the debt collection side, the executives will answer that question. On the 5.8 billion rand made available by Treasury, part of that was for repairs involved post the floods in KZN. But again, the Transnet colleagues can explain how much of that has been spent already, because a lot of the recovery has happened, although not all of it yet, and how much has been used elsewhere. On Mr. Mdaki's comments, I mean, they can respond again to the issue of crane movements, but we have a net shortage of cranes. That's the bottom line. And again, discussions have taken place between Transnet management and, for example, a firm like ZPMC that provides a lot of the cranes in most parts of the world to resolve some old issues. The CEO might want to talk about that. Scrap metal and whether it's made an impact or not, I think it's made some impact. There's some reduction on the cable theft side, but it hasn't made a total impact. And remember, the first 6 months was, if you like, an experimental period. The Department of Trade, Industry and Competition is monitoring this. And I think there's going to be, or has already been, a further extension on the ban itself. The bottom line is that these are syndicates that are operating, and you need a combination both of the ban in exports on the one hand, but a lot more work from the law enforcement point of view. So those who are at the heart of this malfeasance are actually brought to book at the end of the day. Mr. Mabaso will respond to the question of the container corridor, but Mr. Chair, your point as well, profit versus development and profit versus service is going to be the balance that Transnet will have to constantly bear in mind, because profit is not the only motive. We agree with you. Carlton Center, I think the executive responsible for properties will take you into confidence in terms of what direction that is going in, but the caution is a valid one, that in the process, there should not be any hijacking of the building itself. The Honorable Modise's points about cost estimates for expanding capacity, I think the various projects that you've seen presented to you will obviously attract costs, but our executives can see where they can fill in the gaps in terms of the kind of cost estimates that are associated with the upgrading that requires. On the cable theft issue, whether insurance covers it, only the executives will know that. Contingency plans often involve switching from electric trains to diesel trains and vice versa, depending on which part of the network is impacted. And I think that's, again, adding to what appears to be inefficiency on the TFR side. But let's see how Mr. Mabaso can add further information for your purposes. PRASA, I think, suffers the same fate as Transnet. Their network is much smaller. The numbers will be available from the Transnet colleagues. And there's a lot of overlapping between PRASA and Transnet as well in respect of the utilization of infrastructure. And that is why we will still have to look into the future, Chair, on the question of all of the rail infrastructure being housed in an infrastructure entity as opposed to the operations that take place on the infrastructure itself. I'm sure Mr. Selinga would love to have a submarine available to him. And your point about security is valid, although I'm not sure how it operates within the Transnet context. But there are usage of drones elsewhere in the system. And again, the CEO will explain that to you in a moment. Load shedding, as far as I know, does impact on the system itself, but they can give you details on that. And on the question of paying dividends, Chair, Sasol is the one that has paid R1 million as a start to move in the right direction. And the whole purpose of the reform that we want to and are undertaking, whether it's Transnet or any other SOE in our portfolio or elsewhere in the government system, is that sooner rather than later, the reliance on the fiscus by SOEs must be completely removed. And the SOEs must be self-sustaining. So that's the goal, amongst others, which include development that has to be pursued. Your point about the continent is a very valid one, but it also comes with some complexities. And I see the CEO will be attending a meeting in early June in Côte d'Ivoire of her counterparts in other parts of Africa, so she can explain to you what could possibly be achieved in regard to the continent itself. So let me hand over to the CEO, and then she'll bring in her colleagues where appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'll start with Pepe and Jabu. I hope you're ready with the details. On the infrastructure manager, the commitment that we've made is on the 1st of October. Within Transnet Freight Rail, there is going to be the unit which will be called the infrastructure manager. And basically, it would be responsible for the maintenance as well as the selling of the slots to both TFR operating companies as well as the private sector, so that there's an arm's length. It also has to be ring-fenced by virtue of the fact that it would be the regulated entity. I think members are aware that there is the Transport Economic Regulatory Bill, which is before Parliament at present, and the Department of Transport tells us that it should pass between July and August. At that point, it would be the entity to which the infrastructure manager would apply, so that we can be able to get the cost-reflective tariffs that would then apply right across the system. If I may, for me, it's at this point where the question that's asked around our collaborative working relationship with PRASA. We work pretty closely with PRASA for obvious reasons. We share systems in certain parts, especially in the metropolitan areas where we need to move goods. We operate on their system. There needs to be refinement around the charges, even on their side. We were recently talking to them about the work that they are doing to ensure that they have the infrastructure manager established on their side and getting to a point where they have fully cost-reflective tariffs. Because if they don't deal with that, there will be inequity in the system. They'll have to pay cost-reflective tariff on our side, and we and other parties would use their system without getting to a cost-reflective tariff, which is unfortunate because, as you know, effectively the country would be then subsidizing everybody on the other side. So we do work very closely. On the 1st of October, we start the process of what would be business as usual going forward for the infrastructure manager, of selling slots to any party that's looking to get slots on the rail. With regards to international terminal operators, members would be aware that we did a transaction where we were bringing in a partner for TPT at Pier 2 in Durban, which is in the Port of Durban, which is our busiest and biggest container terminal, incidentally. We have finished all of the work internally in Transnet with the board. It's now with the Department of Public Enterprises and National Treasury as the shareholder representatives to make the final decisions, and then we should be able to make an announcement on that and who would be stepping in. Jabu, do you, I think ministers answered the question around where we get the money for the expansion of capacity. Can I just, on the use of the 5.8 billion, it was split in half. 2.9 went to refund us for the returning to service of the rail track, the container corridor in particular after the floods, and the other 2.9 we were using, is being used as we speak to fund the return to service of the long-standing locomotive. So it's of the 2.9 that we had for the floods, about 2.6 has already been used. The point that Minister makes about the scrap sale, the ban on scrap sales, we'll be watching that. But one of the things that we're starting to discover is that by virtue of the fact that you ban export of scrap, and then also we were given a list of entities that could buy the scrap from us, and these are generally mini mills as well as foundries. What that creates is basically almost a cartel, because we're the single seller. We say to the market, and we sell via an auction, we say to the market that we're going to be selling whatever scrap that we'd be selling. And when they come, what we're starting to discover is that the pricing is starting to get very close to each other, which suggests that there might be a conversation that's happening amongst themselves. So it is having its own unintended consequences. The bigger concern, to be very frank, is not so much steel, because on steel we've got a lot of scrap. Our scrap from steels is wagons, it's wheels, it's the track. The scrap that is really genuinely worrisome is the copper cable. What is worrying about the copper cable is that it's going to stay in demand forever. Why? You've got electric vehicles that are coming in, extensive amounts of wiring, multiples of what is currently in a conventional engine car. You also need the copper for solar. So as you go renewables, you need a lot more copper for its conductive power. So we worry about the ongoing demand for copper, and as the minister indicated, that's not a problem that Transnet on its own can solve. We really need a bigger conversation. Recently, if you read the reports about that Greece accident, one of the things they are investigating is copper theft, even on their side. So it is increasingly becoming a global problem. In our case, sure, we've got a massive problem. In our case, I think the closure, first of all, when the security companies stop operating in PRASA, as well as COVID, this is what just opened up our system in a way that had never been opened up before. So a lot of work is being done, and hence, Bongosi would have referenced the outcomes-based security contract. The intention there is to see whether that will help push back the worst of what we currently see. On the issue of insurance, yeah, we could try to insure it, but it's not insurable. The risk is so high that the cost would be prohibitive. We wouldn't be able to pay for it. So at present, we are running the scheme of replacing, but the next probably best thing is actually to increasingly to de-energize and to basically dieselize, to make the system fundamentally a diesel system. At present, we're 60% electric and 40% diesel. The benefit of moving to diesel is that you actually have a reliable rail system. That's it, the trains move, first of all. It may have an impact on greenhouse gases in terms of the diesel emissions. However, by virtue of the fact that it removes a large number of trucks, and if it's reliable, even a larger number of trucks, I would argue, not net neutral. It probably is net positive by virtue of the fact that it removes the trucks from road. On the manganese, we're trying everything, and I must be frank, we're increasing capacity on rail to export manganese. Manganese is one of those new minerals that's required as a result of the movement towards electric vehicles and renewables. The real problem with manganese, and that's a problem that requires government and the Department of Mineral Resources solution, we need to get to a point where somebody must ban the movement of manganese on road. For as long as there isn't a ban on the movement of manganese on road, unfortunately, because at our ports, we are able to handle manganese both on road and on road as well as on rail. It's unlike iron ore. We can only handle iron ore when it arrives on rail, not at all on truck. In fact, incidentally, same problem on coal, because we can accept coal on road and we can accept coal on rail. So that's not something that we can contain as Transnet. That requires government to contain at the end of the day. For as long as there's a market and there's demand, people are going to put the commodities on road. The impact of load shedding, we feel it, but we're safe pretty much until stage 6, generally in the system. We're safe in the operations. That doesn't mean we're not immunized at all in terms of the officers, as you would have seen with Mr. Ndag. On occasion, we've had our ports shut down for 6 to 12 hours in both Saldanha and Richards Bay. And that's traumatizing because those are very electricity intensive ports. In the case of Saldanha, we were able to get some support. We got support from the mining industry where we were able to curtail the demand in other areas and they were able to switch us back on. We are, and TNPA may talk a little bit about the program for renewables and as well as gensets that they're bringing into the system so that at the ports we have greater independence from the grid so that we can continue to operate. I think Gqeberha will answer the Carlton Centre in greater details, but just to let you know that the Carlton Centre is not closed. It continues to operate. So we are selling it as an operating entity. Jabu will answer the question on the crane moves. 45 crane moves doesn't quite happen. In fact, when we asked Singapore, they said that when they're really cranking it up, they get up to 32, 35, but not much higher than that. But as the minister has indicated, those are fundamentally automated ports, unlike ourselves, which have a lot of people interfaces as well at the ports. Chabu, do you want to start first? Maybe Pepe, you start, and then Chabu, and then Bonkosi, you come in and pick up your questions. If there's anything left out, we will respond further, Chair. Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thank you, Portia. Thank you, honourable members and honourable minister. The first question was in relation to the port operators. Chair, we have about 92 terminal operating licenses. These are held by 38 terminal operators. That on average, that would suggest, and this is on average, Chair, just for purposes of, that would suggest each holding just about 2.5 of these licenses. Now, the cargo by nature goes global. In some instances, it's coming inside the country from somewhere, or it's going out of the country. So it's in the nature of the cargo that is being handled. But, it's products that are moving in and out, connected with the global world. So that was the first question, Chair. The second question is on Mossel Bay, Richards Bay, and Saldanha. Yes, indeed, Chair, we reported a few of these ports as distressed ports. From a range of perspectives, we used multi-criteria to arrive at that particular conclusion. In a sense, TNPA or the Port Authority is a monopoly, and it's very hard for monopolies to actually make a loss. So far as earnings before interest, tax, dividends, and amortization, really, with the exception of a very small one, which is Mossel Bay and East London, which had just in the order of about 20% or so. Of course, Chair, when you begin to effect the cost of borrowing into those EBITDA numbers, the numbers do come down somewhat, but they still make a net a surplus, let me put it that way. And to the extent that the methodology that is used by the port regulator of South Africa, is a required revenue model, which basically protects from ever making a loss, so to speak, provided the efficiencies are in place. So we do have some particular surplus. However, Chair, that needs to be balanced against what would be the future cost of replacing of these particular assets. And that is something that we need to be constantly preoccupied with, because the replacement cost is often surprisingly much higher than what we might have been putting aside, if you like, as reserve funds for recreating of the assets. Chair, and there was a question from Honorable Nana. The first questions were from Honorable Nana. The question related to debt collection. For debt collection, we don't use debt collectors in the other sense of the word. So initially, we try and collect from internal using TNPA employees, and that process culminates with letters from our internal legal department. And if there's no movement, then in preparation for then going to court and getting the appropriate court orders for eviction, amongst other things, we then engage the private firm of attorneys who are then obliged to send the letters of demand. So in a sense, we don't use debt collectors in the manner in which I think Honorable Nana would have intended. Yeah, we think that it works much quicker and much better, and with a better value for money in the way in which we are utilizing them. The big part of it, 80% of the effort, still needs to be undertaken internally, and often we find that if we react very quickly from the time of defaulting or payment, it does not entrench itself as a culture, because people immediately realize that you're going to be acting quickly, and then it acts as a deterrent for future deviant behavior. And the Honorable Minister has dealt with the point raised by Honorable Modise in relation to estimation of budgets for projects to increase capacity. Indeed, each particular project gets scoped, and of course, the estimates for the projected cost of those particular projects improve as the projects approach towards execution, and hopefully they get up to as close as 95% by the time we're going out with a bill of quantities. So in a sense, when it starts at the beginning from a planning, conceptual planning phase and pre-feasibility, feasibility, as it becomes clearer in precise terms what the scope of work is going to be, how the market is looking like in terms of the cost of construction, then the estimates also improve quite significantly. Yes, and they are driven by very specific timeframes, and they are very modern tools to actually use so that you can evaluate performance against a predetermined desired end state, both in terms of timeframes, but also in terms of the asset that you are attempting to create. There are unfortunately, in total, these projects at the moment, we've estimated them and we've gone in detail in each particular port, and basically talking about just about 575 projects. So I wouldn't be able to go through each one of them, but we'll also keep track of the big ones as well that we know would have a material effect on our destiny from a financial control point of view. If Chair, your specific question around property having made a profit, that income, Chair, that I was talking about, the 4 billion odd, is effectively income from the property portfolio. So in a sense, it was not, if you like, a profit, it was income from property. But nevertheless, as I indicated earlier on, Honorable Chairperson, that indeed we are on the positive insofar as EBITDA is concerned. And insofar as the marine fleet is concerned, the Honorable Minister, I must say, somebody once said you must be careful what you wish for in case you get it. No, we do not have a need for a submarine. We do have an extremely close relationship with the South African National Defence Force. And in the instance of, in particular, the Port of Durban, or for that matter, the Port of Richards Bay. Insofar as that type of threat, they would have the primary responsibility to secure the coast, so to speak. It is for that reason, Chair, that in the current reconfiguration of the Port of Durban, we are in agreement and aligned with the South African National Defence Force insofar as reconfiguration of the capacity in the Port of Durban, that is the naval capacity in the Port of Durban, and establishing an extremely strong foothold in the Port of Richards Bay. And the synergies, Chair, we have in the discussions agreed with the National Defence Force that they in fact extend beyond, to the extent that they've got some of the skills that they could assist us with, and we could also meaningfully engage with them to the extent that it benefits them, including training of young people who would be subjected to the requisite disciplined training that they are able to provide. So within these particular ports, and we've got in Cape Town, as well as in Durban, which will in some instances be moved to Richards Bay, a capability to accommodate their ordinances in the various capabilities, including them being able to work on those particular vessels insofar as refurbishment and maintenance of those particular vessels is part of what is in the footprint from a port design point of view. Yes, Chair, the drones are a critical component of the strategy that has been recently developed. Hitherto, it was not one of the tools that we were deploying, and we were running a little bit behind the curve. We have already acquired some which we are using from a port planning point of view, but we're scaling up to the security side of things, including ensuring the appropriate certification of people who would operate those. It's absolutely fundamental. Part of what we would want to do is to reduce to some extent the human element, increase technology, reduce instances of breach of security, of course, upskill the existing foot soldiers, so to speak, so that there's effective utilization of technology with the benefits of being able to leverage in terms of scale and speed as well. Yes, in terms of the backup system, the GCE has already alluded to it. So in each particular port, in those transversal projects, Chair, we have done extensive work in determining the levels of consumption of utility services and what is actually required from a critical point of view. Each particular port being located in each city, different cities have got slightly different protocols in terms of at what level of load shedding do they then kick in load shedding at a port level. And we've been largely protected, Chair, because most of the cities have got high thresholds to try and protect the ports. But of course, there's a point beyond which, I think once it reaches beyond level 6, there's a point beyond which they themselves are not able to actually protect us from that unfortunate eventuality. It is for that reason that these diesel engines have actually been acquired, but also we've got a very aggressive program insofar as the renewable projects across the ports that will be deployed. Some would be starting, if I remember well, Island, and will be commencing around January, February. The idea is that by around December of 2024, we would have largely covered all of the ports with sufficient capacity to be able to withstand extreme levels of load shedding. And indeed, insofar as the continental agenda is concerned, Chair, just to indicate, we just finished a collaborative contract with the port in Maputo, which was a dredging collaborative relationship, which came out of strategic conversations on the agenda that the GCE has actually been driving, went exceptionally well. South Africa currently chairs PAMESA, which basically is a Pan-African organization of all the ports. Of course, some countries still need to join. And the discussions at that particular forum are around leveraging common resources that we have to circulate the limited resources that we have amongst ourselves. And those discussions are proceeding pretty well, Chair. The meetings take place, I think, once every 4 months, often mostly preferred to be held in South Africa by their popular choice. So it is something that is firmly in our agenda insofar as training is concerned. Of course, in some instances, there's some adaptations in terms of the language, because some countries, they speak French and some speak Portuguese. But largely, there is a unity of purpose and aligned from a strategy point of view that we need to be doing our part in this particular area. Thank you very much.
Chair, yeah. Chair, if I may come in just on the questions that were directed at TPT. Some of the questions would have been responded to by the Minister as well as the GCE, but if I may add to them. On the questions of the vacancies, as I've indicated, some of the skills that we're looking for, where the Minister was talking about automated terminals and the, some of the machines that we use in the ports and terminals being automated. We train our own OLEs or operator of lifting equipment. So those are the critical skills. We are in an extensive program of training those. We expect to have finished most of them by the end of the year so that we can be able to fill those. Second to that is then that of the technical skills, the people that actually fix the machines and maintain them. That also we are in the process of aligning our requirement with the skills that we require, as well as how do we then utilize the short-term requirements in terms of the OEMs, as well as our partners like TE to supplement us when we are needing the required skills. So that is work that is in progress. We expect that by the time that we do address the committee next year, that is a situation that would have improved quite drastically. On the GCH, which is the cross crane movement per hour, which was asked, and the target of that being the 25 moves per hour for a container. It's something that we're working towards. At the moment, given the challenge that we've got with the equipment, we are not where we would like to be. It's driven largely by the availability of your equipment on the land side, which will be then your RTGs, the struggle machines, because what you have is the land-based equipment that are feeding the containers to the ship-to-shore crane. The rate at which then the ship-to-shore crane is able to process those containers on the vessel is decided by the rate at which it is able to receive those cranes. I've already indicated that we do have the challenge with regard to the equipment availability and the reliability. So if you do not have sufficient equipment, you'll find that you are not able to deploy the sufficient number of gangs or teams to support a specific cranes. But as we are addressing the equipment availability, we're able to improve on the number of gangs and the equipment that is supporting individual crane. That will answer the question with regard to the GCH. On the load shedding within the ports, I think if I may just add, where we also collaborate with some of the industry. A good example will have been in Saldanha, where when we were impacted with the load shedding, the iron ore users actually came forward to make a suggestion which we put to Eskom distribution, and it was accepted that if there is a need to load shed the port in Saldanha, let's offset that with the offsetting, reducing the load by an equivalent that is required at the mines, so that we keep the port flowing, that the port is not a bottleneck. So it's just something that we also want just to confirm that we do have a close working relationship with the industry, and especially in that instance in Saldanha, the iron ore users really came forward and ensured that we are able to keep that port operational all the time. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, thank you for the opportunity. Just to maybe add here and there from the points that were raised by both Honorable Minister and Ms. Portia. First of all, just tackling the issue of the number of trucks for manganese, which I think they answered quite in detail. With the initiatives that we posted in the presentation, we are looking at about 67,540 trucks that will be removed off the road. That is single trip with a load. If you look at both single and return, it's a double of that of 135,000 trucks that will be removed off the road just by those initiatives. To Honorable Minister's point, would really appreciate feedback from those that are close to either the Eastern Cape or the Northern Cape, insofar as what that does visibly in those regions. Secondly, on the question around the container corridor, which Honorable Nana asked, the impact of cable theft is quite significant. Across the organization, you're looking at about 3,800 number of cases or incidents of cable theft. Out of 3,800, 1,400 sits in the container corridor alone. That accounts for 40%. Out of 6 corridors, 1 corridor takes 40% of all cable theft incidents. And therefore, the point around recovering 20 cents in a rand really is partially as a result of the volumes that we move there that is reducing quite significantly. So while our cost increases, unfortunately, the throughput reduces, and therefore that impacts the balance of cost recovery. Equally, the issue on cable theft is not so much one that can be addressed through ensuring the infrastructure, primarily because the impact of it is mostly felt by the operational or productivity stoppages. Over the last financial year alone, we recorded 3.7 billion rands lost as a result of cable theft. Out of that, only 300 million rands was money that was spent in fixing the line. The majority of the losses were as a result of us not being able, the stoppages on the operation, which accounted for a significant portion of that. And of course, then the amount spent insofar as maintaining the security itself, the security cost. Securing means through an insurance policy, the line and infrastructure would have an impact insofar as us being reimbursed for the expenditure, but it won't help the economy significantly because productivity will continue to be affected. The maybe last question that I would like to touch on, which emanated, if I recall correctly, from Honorable Baby around private sector participation. I think it came up quite extensively across the conversation. We are working very closely with private sector in many of our initiatives. I've spoken about in manganese alone 3 initiatives, one of which, the Cape Town one, will be enabled through security technologies that will be implemented. A customer of ours is partnering with us in effecting those security solutions. You're looking at an expenditure of about 100 million rands that will go into a technology that will cut the line, which is where the volumes will come from. Equally, even our medium long-term expansion projects, such as the Sishen link line that we are working on, we are engaging the industries to come to the party with the necessary investment as well. And therefore, whilst growth in terms of capacity is realized, it will be in line with industry coming to the party to sort of support. Equally, and this is something that we hold very closely in our initiatives, we also have realized that a majority of trucks that will not respond to market conditions comes from emerging miners who do not have a single ton of ore on the road or on rail. Therefore, those people are subjected to tracking whether the conditions are good or not good. Whilst established players that we have in the system are able to respond to markets and reduce tracking when markets start stabilizing. For that reason, we've focused capacity allocation as well to emerging miners to give effect to growing the manganese industry, but also because we know that's where trucks are constantly coming from that are feeding the road. And we are seeing already with the emerging miners, we've introduced an additional 6 emerging miners, which brings the total of emerging miners to 12 alone, just to 10 rather alone in the manganese space. That will have an impact immediately on the number of trucks that you see on the road. I do believe, Honorable Chair, that we've responded extensively to all questions. I'll hand back to Ms. Portia to maybe wrap this up before handing back to you if there are any that we've left. Thank you.
Carlton Center, Gqeberha, please.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair, Honorable Minister, and honorable members. In terms of Carlton Center, I took it more as a comment that we should guard that the property is not invaded illegally. I can confirm to the committee that currently Transnet uses Carlton Center. There is no threat of invasion, and we have put it out into the market for disposal. And we are not going to leave Carlton Center as Transnet until the new buyer takes over. It is only when the new buyer takes over that Transnet will vacate Carlton Center. The security will remain there until the new buyer or the new owner brings their own security to guard the property. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. That's us done, I hope. Thank you very much.
Well, I think I don't see any further hands from the members. I think the answers that we have received actually covers all the questions that were raised as well as the comments. Minister, let's give you an opportunity to have a parting shot before we conclude on this item.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. I think what you have presented to you today is a combination of initiatives which address immediate constraints, take care of factors sometimes even beyond the control of Transnet, like cable theft, and an optimistic outlook in terms of both increasing services to South Africa's economy in the immediate term, but also, as you pointed out, huge investments coming in various forms, starting this year and going on for many years to come as well. And in that sense, Transnet is a major contributor to what future generations of South Africans will inherit, and our job in the immediate term is to get it stabilized, which it is getting there. Secondly, to ensure that it is self-sustaining. And thirdly, to also ensure that where appropriate, the right kind of partners and partnerships can actually be built. What we now need, as you pointed out as well, is to build on relationships across the continent and see what we can do in terms of mutual solidarity, not just in terms of training, but also in terms of a more collective approach and a collective strategy for ensuring that intercontinental trade is advanced on the one hand, and both the continental interest and the national interest of each country is looked after as well. But that, I'm sure, is something that will be developed and begin to mature over the next year or so. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Chair, and for the constructive engagement with yourselves. And thanks to the Transnet team, who've done very well. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Minister. Siyabonga kakhulu, as we put it in my language. And I'm quite very happy that you came personally here to take us through this. Thank you for being flexible, that we moved you from Wednesday to today and you still made yourself available on a Friday. I also wish to thank DM Obed Mapela. I know, DM, that if you would have wanted to say something, you would have indicated. It's not just a question that we overlooked you. We knew that if you wanted to say something, you would have made that indication. We thank you for attending this meeting from beginning to end. Sis Portia, Budbebi Silinga, Mr. Mdaki, and Mr. Babaso, and the entire team of Transnet, we really appreciate. At another appropriate time, we'll make an indication if we still want to make an interaction with you during this year. But for now, we really much appreciate what you have done for us today, and it helps us in our oversight and in our plans as we have just begun the new financial year on what course of things that we may want to look at from your perspective. We want to release you now, and we will continue with our business. We wish you all the best as you go back to your desks to carry on other tasks. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, DM. Thank you, GCO. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Honorable members, just one moment. We have one more item that we need to look at as we allow the guests to step out of the room. We will just pause just for 1 minute. Honorable members, let's continue. We want to look at the set of those minutes. I hope that these minutes, you can see them because they are already flighted. Amanda, if you can just make a pronounce on those minutes in terms of their date. And also just indicate the attendees, because this should be one of the shortest minutes. The date is there, members. These minutes are for the meeting which was held on the 24th of May, where we're considering the adoption of the Department of Public Enterprises Annual Performance Plan and Strat Plan. And those are the members that are highlighted there that were present. Scroll down. Yeah.
The previous meeting, unfortunately, I got cut off. I do not know whether colleagues did pick up that Amanda and her team gave me a new surname of Nana. I'm wondering if that was corrected. If not, can I please request that it be corrected? My surname has got the 2 H's in it, and HA and HA. Thank you.
Yeah, it is corrected. It is reflected as the correct one.
No, I'm referring to last week's committee meeting.
Oh, yes, I did point. I think I did point to that as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Because I saw that it was misspelled.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nana. Carry on. Those were the parliamentary support staff that was present. That's page 1 on welcoming and considering apologies. And then the report. And then how we moved and adopted the minutes of the previous meeting, as well as the minutes of the preceding meeting of the 19th. and until the adoption as well as the closing remarks. Thank you, members. That's where we are. Is there a member who would like to move for the adoption of these minutes of the 24th?
PP moves, Chairperson, for the adoption of the minutes.
Mam PP is moving for the adoption of the minutes. Do we have a seconder?
Second, Honorable Bibi.
Memo Dise is seconding Honorable Bibi. That means then that these minutes are duly adopted as a true reflection of the meeting which was held on the 24th of May. Members, that brings us to the end of the engagement of today's meeting. I wish to express my appreciation to members for making time on a Friday, a day wherein we don't normally hold meetings, a day wherein it's considered as a traveling day for members of parliament. We thank you for this sacrifice and the commitment to the cause of serving the people. This meeting was very important because, as you could see, the matters that came up from the presentation of Transnet, these are matters that can never be postponed because they need to be looked at right from the time of inception so that we move with them as they carry them across so that we are not left out and we ensure that everything that ought to happen happens within the confines and the provisions of the laws of the country. Having said that, members, I take this opportunity to wish you a wonderful